Write Night is a talk show with published authors, writers, and content creators discussing both the creative and technical sides of writing, as well as the industry surrounding it, from novels to screenplays to comics and more. And now, here's your host, author Travis I. Sivart.
Welcome to Write Night. We'll get to the topic and discussion in just a moment. For those listening to the podcast, we record the podcast on our live stream at twitch.tv/Travis Tavern Talk, and we have a live interactive chat audience. You might hear the sound of the bell ding, and that means I want to interrupt somebody to read a comment or question. For those on the live stream, we won't read off everything you put in chat, but we'll try to get to the most relevant, the most amusing, or some combination of the both. Now, while we introduce ourselves, go and let us know what you're reading, writing, or creating tonight. Okay, while chat puts that in there, we're going to talk to you guys. We have been on an Odyssey of Editing for 3 episodes now, where my editor, Tara, who I will have introduce herself in a moment, has joined me to go over a chapter of my latest novel, Silver and Smith and Doppelganger's Gate, Book 2 of Silver and Smith Chronicles. One from the first act, one from the center of the book, in the middle of the second act, and one in the beginning of the third act. So we're not getting straight to the climax, but we're entering that climax. We're going to try to get through this whole chapter on this episode, but besides Silver and Smith, I've also written Portals and many other series. Feel free to check them out at bit.ly, that's bit.ly/Travis Books. Tara, tell them a little bit about yourself and what kind of editing we're working on.
Hi, my name is Tara Moeller, and I am the Dreamer-in-Chief at Dreampunk Press, a small publishers collective based out of Norfolk, Virginia. We're a group of authors that publish together. And yeah, I'm a published author too.
Absolutely.
I have been editing for Travis for several years now. Absolutely adore his writing. And I basically usually am doing line and copy editing. Line editing is the term used more in manuscripts. Copy editing is for the copywriting or advertising. However, I've been drifting into developmental comments here as well, mostly because I absolutely love how this story is developing.
And Tara, I've said it in the last episode, I'll say it again. I love when you give me developmental comments in the sidelines here. I have since the very first thing you've ever edited, where you're like, I love this statement. That is so encouraging. Those few words make a difference. And by the way, for anybody who can't see, I am holding a bottle of Irish whiskey called Writer's Tears. As I have said, through this whole trilogy of podcasts, I have been drinking this, and I am on the last bit for this. Let's try to get us, because this is a longer chapter. I don't know if we'll make it through, but we're going to try. So I'm going to read anywhere from 1 to 3 pages and then let Tara comment about some of the edits she made. Now, Tara, I see right here we immediately have a huge highlighted area. So do you want me to stop after I hit the end of that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to stop one chapter after that because the paragraph after that you rearranged it. So I'm going to hit that too so we can hit all that at once and then I can read a bunch. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Works for me.
So let me lean forward and get into my reading stance, if you will. So we're entering the third act here. We're entering the climax. And they're headed for the final big showdown. Silver and Smith, the 2 main characters. Wind whipped past Silver, and he pulled his arms against his side and dove, increasing his descent speed from the Sliver One to the streets of Nazca. He was buffeted from side to side, the currents clawing at his wingsuit. Worried about Hank, he looked over his shoulder to make sure the lighter woman wasn't taking a beating from the violent slipstream. Silver was astonished by what he saw. Hank soared, gliding along the tumultuous air above the city. Volcanic rents in the ground threw sulfur and flows of heat into the sky, colliding with the cooler air coming in off the ocean. But Hank took it like she had been born to fly. The woman never ceased to amaze Silver. Her graceful motions, sharp pivots, turns and dives made the bounty hunter think of Hank's other nickname, the Hawk. It had been given to her because of her natural eye as a sharpshooter, but he had to wonder if any of her former schoolmates had seen Henrietta Smith in the air. A beam of purple, plasma-like energy sliced through the air, shattering Silver's thoughts. And I'm going to pause here to let Tara drop some comments.
So I have highlighted paragraph 2 through
6, 7?
6.
Yeah.
There are no edits in those paragraphs. But I wanted to talk, and again, I've been drifting into, my intention was copy edits, and I've been drifting into the developmental. Mainly, I think, because to highlight what's so good in this book. And one of the things that I have mentioned is the relationship between Silver and Smith. And this is a turning point, I think, for Silver. He is seeing Hank in a new light. Up until this point, he's been babying just a touch,
right,
a little bit, worrying that he's put too much on her. He's not doing enough. He's older, he's more experienced, whatnot. And here he's worried about Hank. It's right at the beginning here, worried. He looks over his shoulder, and it's like, why is he worried? Okay, you have Hank soaring. She's not having a problem.
And he is.
And the end of he is, yes. And her nickname is already the Hawk. And we already know, and we've gotten our backstory on how she got this nickname. And so it's an abbreviated version here because I'm not sure he knows the full of it. We know more as the reader about Hank's nickname, the Hawk, than Silver really does. We understand a little bit more. And so for us, the reader, we're like, dude, come on. Because we've been shared this, an internal monologue with Hank already. And it's beautiful that Travis doesn't go into that big thing because Silver doesn't know it all, but he tells us enough to remind us that he doesn't know the entire story because this is all Silver really knows about that nickname. And then, but this passage closes out with him using Henrietta Smith, her full name, which kind of emphasizes that he knows Hank, but he doesn't know Henrietta Smith.
Right.
There's more to this young woman, and he is realizing it here. And I think this was, oh, sorry.
She's getting choked up, folks.
Yes, I am. I've already, not in this episode, but hey, I love and adore these characters. Because again, while he's observing, there's no sexuality in this. And I've brought this up in the past 2 episodes, both, that this is it's a platonic friend relationship. And at no point in time is there ever a hint that there might be anything else.
See.
And in a lot of books, you get that. I love this about these characters. And while he's there, he's watching her soar. He's seeing she's graceful. And yet there's still just this awe, and there's no possessive points in here. There's nothing but total and absolute respect for a new aspect, something he didn't know about her. He expected her to be having problems. He's kind of been doing trying to do the father thing. And he's recognizing here, and I think, and we get all of that in 5 paragraphs.
See, something I try to do as a writer here is, here's something I'll tell other writers out there. Our gift as writers is empathy. Even if you haven't been in that situation, to be able to put yourself in that situation and see it from that point of view. And this is almost a double mirror and what was that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio? Inception. It's almost an inception moment, where as a writer, I'm empathetic, showing the empathy of Silver. We all remember, well, no, we don't all remember. This is the writer's gift. We don't remember being young and being capable. And when we're older, we look back at younger people and we're surprised when they're capable. But so many of us were capable when we were younger, not experienced, but capable. And this is what I try to bring in with these different perspectives and empathy. Wordowin says, romantic tension really annoys me, so I toss it into the boink right away, then make fun of it. Romantic tension has its place, but not in this book. Not in this book.
Not in.
There is a point of romantic teasing in both of the books, 2 or 3. Where, and usually it comes up where the other character is teasing the other primary character about, hey, look at that. But it's not.
I noticed you looking at that, Ensign.
Right. And there's points where Hank teases Silver, and there's points where Silver teases Hank. And that's it. It's a paragraph. It's a moment. Because it's not part of this story. And it doesn't need to be. But that it's there is okay to point out and go, look, it's there. Now let's move on with the story. Okay. Good to read on?
Yeah. Let me, you had read through that next paragraph because I did some changes. And again, that was making certain that things happen in order. When you originally wrote it, you had that Silver's thoughts were shattered as a beam of purple plasma-like energy sliced through the air. Again, that puts the reader, makes them have to rewind.
Gotcha.
So it's better to have it a beam of purple plasma-like energy sliced through the air, shattering Silver's thoughts.
So again, as a writer, beyond empathy, that's that one lesson we're looking at. This lesson is throughout these 3 episodes that we've put together with the 3 different chapters, I've learned about the word as, and I've learned about making sure you put things in order, even if it's in the same sentence, because that can break the reader's continuity and jar them out of the reading. You want to keep it smooth and flowing and in sequence as much as you can, unless you're looking to shatter that and pull them out for a moment for whatever reason. Okay.
Yeah, there are times when I don't change it because there's simply 2 things happening at the same time.
Or if it's M dashes, then you are breaking that to interrupt it with this.
Exactly.
Or if you go into that introspective 5 paragraphs.
Right. But what this also did is, instead of it being we're shattered, you've got that shattering. It's action. It's happening then. So you've got that action happening with the reaction in linear. So
okay, reading on till either Tara shouts stop or till I hit a point where it's reasonable. So I'm 1 to 3 pages here. Hank veered, arcing between the crackling rays, pale lavender pulses. Pushing the pad on the palm of his glove, Silver activated the hover rounds on his shoulders, solar plexus, hips, and knees, and shot upward. Breaking through the thick smoke that roiled up from below, he saw the creature lumbering through the rubble of the city towards the other glyph. The creature lurched along the street, becoming steadier and more responsive to its environment with each plodding step of its thick legs. I'm going to interrupt myself here real quick. Last chapter, the big monster came out. And it's a very Cthulhu, Lovecraftian type monster. And I realize there's some negativity associated with Lovecraft at this point. But the darker monstrosities are still a fair point in writing. Thumbing the indicator on his glove, Silver sent the target to Hank's heads-up display, or HUD. Now, you've got that highlighted. Do you want to talk about that real quick before I go on? Go on.
Yes. Just use HUD.
Did I use it previously in the book?
Nope.
I need to tell them what a heads-up display is. There's somebody that's not going to know what that is.
No, it stops. It stops the flow here. I've got a whole little thing. You cannot do it, but it makes it sound like a lecture. Read it. Read it. Read it.
I just did.
No, read it again.
Thumbing the indicator on his glove, Silver sent the target to Hank's heads-up display, or HUD.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You are narrating, you are lecturing the reader.
But some people aren't going to know what the HUD is. How do I define HUD for them here?
I don't think you do. I don't think you need to.
How about the next HUD in the next sentence, I put heads-up display. And capitalize HUD. It's a common thing in sci-fi, and most sci-fi readers are definitely going to recognize it, but you always have the first-timer. I have people that read Portals, never had read fantasy before. See, and Wordowin suggests capitalize heads-up display the first time, use HUD the next time. I would almost say use HUD the first time and then capitalize it the second time. What do you guys... in quick discussion here.
Yeah, see, I know exactly what a HUD is.
Right.
And it's a head-up display, not a heads-up display.
Oh, okay. Why didn't you correct that part?
Because I don't think you should have heads-up display in there at all. I think you should just call it a HUD.
Any other opinions from anybody? Mm-hmm. Only what? Tara, you said only?
Did I?
Okay. We'll set this aside for now. We're going to go on with the reading. And this is something...
It was a suggestion on my part. I don't think you need to define HUD, mainly because it slows down the action.
You know what? Maybe I'll put sent the target to Hank's HUD, the heads-up display blinking, a green indicator light in response. I'll figure this out. There's a smoother way to put it. I do have HUD a lot in this Wordowin. You can just see those capital letters all over the place. It's only those 3 paragraphs. So, yeah, maybe the next time use heads-up display capitalized, and the third and fourth time use HUD. I'll work with it. I'll shift it around and see. Okay.
To me, it felt like you might be lecturing the reader a little bit the way it comes across. The way
you
it
have
is
that
now.
right there, too, in the comments. Okay.
Yeah.
So, agree. Oh, what did I? Hold on. Now it's clicking on things. Okay. A green indicator light flashed in response on his own HUD, and the two dove in unison, splitting apart to avoid being taken out as a single target. The attacks emanated from 5 city blocks beyond the monster near the portal geoglyph. Silver's HUD lit up with the origin point, and he zoomed in on the upper left quadrant of his helmet's face. I need faceplate there. Faceplate. A face appeared in the green square on the HUD, and I could put readout there, Wordowin. I see where you're saying there's too much HUD. I hear you on that. I could put readout. It was one he'd seen twice before, framing the man who'd come to them in New York City. When all this started, Xavier Green stared up at Silver. He nodded like he knew he was being watched. Silver watched as Green punched something into his CP. Yeah, I'll revisit that, Wordowin, because I definitely need some cleaning up one way or the other. Greetings, Mr. Jones. The words appeared below the man's image, in sync with... And I'll take man's out there and put in sync with the emotionless voice emanating from the helmet's earpiece. Now that I have your attention, please join me on the ground so we may discuss the next step of this joint endeavor. Sorry, it's getting late. Silver jerked in surprise, swerving to one side and almost getting clipped by a chunk of architecture plummeting from a building. How did you get on this channel? Silver asked, the words converting to text automatically, sending to Xavier and Hank. Doesn't matter, Green answered in text and voice. But we need to coordinate if we want this to be successful. Come down and join me. I've sent the same, and no, he does not speak in contractions. I have sent the same message to Ms. Smith. They'd been compromised. The comms were a private encrypted channel, and somehow Green had gotten access to them. Hank landed on an outcropping of a shattered building that jutted over the broken landscape that had been Nazca City 20 minutes earlier. She caught Silver's eye by waving her arms overhead. She communicated that she'd cover him while he went down to talk with Green using hand signals. Probably need to put using hand signals at the beginning of that sentence. She'd cover him. Using hand signals, she communicated that she'd cover him while he went down to talk with Green. Yeah, I'll flip that.
Yeah, that would work better.
Silver targeted a landing zone near the man and circled downward, slowing and dropping to the shattered asphalt a few meters away from the agent of the Threat Assessment Incorporation. You shot at us. Silver stalked towards the agent. No, Green shook his head. I got your attention because of the compromised communication network and the magnetic anomaly that has encompassed the area. I needed some way to get you to notice me. We need to stop that thing. Silver gestured at the alien behemoth as his graphene faceplate disappeared into his helmet. Before it gets to the next glyph. No, Mr. Jones. Green shook his head. We need to allow this thing to do what it is supposed to do, then capture it. This is exactly the sort of thing we were hoping to find, and all the technology that goes with this process. What? Silver asked. Was this man asking him and Hank to stand aside while this thing destroyed a city brought in an alien force? You want us to let it do whatever it is it's doing? Silver's stomach clenched. Exactly. Green nodded, his muscles rippling underneath his black uniform. When Silver had met with Green in New York City a few weeks back, the agent hadn't been muscular. He'd been thin and gaunt, like a cadaver of putty stretched taut. Even with the best personal trainers and steroids, it hadn't been enough time for the man to have changed from his skinny form to the one rippling beneath the jumpsuit he now wore. Silver's mind clicked through likely scenarios. The list was short, and only one possibility seemed to fit. We let it do whatever it is doing, Green continued. Then we apprehend it. All of our sources say it will be at its weakest at that point. I don't think so, Silver shook his head. Then you are no longer of use to us. Green's neutral expression shifted and rippled. The corners of his mouth stretched outward, and Silver flinched backwards as he witnessed one of the weirdest smiles he'd ever seen. The agent's grin grew wider, splitting the man's face, and the lips stretching into a thin line. The man's skin pebbled, and the beige shade of the flesh took on a verdant cast. The agent's eyes expanded, the whites disappearing, dark pupils bleeding outward to fill the enlarged glassy globes. Green spread his arms and splayed his fingers like he was coming in for an especially creepy and awkward hug. The skin on the agent's hands undulated, and the man's fingers lengthened, the skin between the digits extending into fleshy webbing. The man in front of Silver was no longer human. Green hunched in a predatory pose and launched himself at the gladiator. Oh, I'm sorry, gladiator. I don't know where I got that word. I looked away at the bounty hunter. The dark-skinned man spun to one side, pulling his Glocks from the holster strapped to his thighs. Green swatted the weapons out of the bounty hunter's hands. I used that twice in a couple paragraphs. Stepping forward, he was in Silver's personal space before Silver could react. He used the name twice in one sentence. Claws sprouted from Green's fingertips, and the creature raked Silver's face. I'll clean that up.
Yeah, and let's pause for a moment.
Go
right
ahead.
there. I want to. So, I want to talk a little bit about two words that almost they kind of mean this, underneath and beneath. They mean pretty much the same thing.
Right.
You used underneath all the time.
Okay.
I changed a couple through here to beneath. So underneath, and I went, and actually checked definitions to make sure that I was getting this right. Means directly beneath, especially so as to be hidden. So if it's underneath something, it's like underneath the blankets, it's covered, it's hidden.
Underground. Whereas you're never
Pardon?
Underground, but you're never be-ground.
Right. Beneath usually means like a lower position. Okay. However, there still, when you look at the definition for beneath, it refers you to underneath. So they mean the same thing. So you can use them almost interchangeably.
Now, in this one,
because you can use underneath here twice, correctly, because you're talking hidden, but you use the same word twice.
That's fair.
So I changed one, okay? And I changed the second one because in the first instance of it, Silver is just figuring out what's going on.
Right.
So it's still hidden from him what's going on, and that green might not be. And then we go through he hadn't been muscular before. He'd been gaunt almost, and so it's not as hidden, which is why I changed the second use of underneath to beneath.
Makes sense.
Real subtle, but I wanted to address. And you'll see this in my edits. There's a couple of other places I changed underneath to beneath because beneath means in a lower position. So underneath doesn't really mean that. It means directly below, but not necessarily, beneath, if you're talking positional, is a better word to use. Here, that's not the case. I just changed it because you were repeating the word and to kind of emphasize, it's kind of not something we would really, as a reader, go, oh, I see what happened there. But it does, we do have that understanding, even if we don't, not necessarily right there on the surface, beneath the surface. So I wanted to address that there.
Makes sense.
Just that there's slight difference, and yes, you can use them pretty much interchangeably. But then if you are using it repetitive, think about it, which one would make more sense to change.
Well, if I keep it in mind with underneath, underground, that means under is unseen, beneath is below. So beneath, below, underneath, underground. For me,
underneath usually implies it's something hidden.
Yeah,
that it's under something that is obscuring the blue, whereas beneath, it would be beneath. You can still see it.
But that'll be my mnemonic to help me out.
Yeah.
Okay. Ready?
Sure.
Okay. Sighting through Sydney's scope, Hank caught movement. Adjusting the distancing mechanism, she saw the hand-to-hand combat of the two men 30 stories below her. Something was wrong. Silver was pale, shaking, and looked terrified, an expression Hank had never seen on the man before. It was like an ill-fitting shirt of desperation that she imagined smelled like old mothballs and musty things, metaphorically speaking at least, that had been long locked away. She closed her eye, pressed it to the scope, opened the other, and pivoted to look at the giant creature lurching towards the east. The beast moved with a rolling gait.
Can I pause you for just a moment, Travis?
Go ahead.
You stopped. Paused after eye. Do you need a pause? Like, I took that as she closed the eye that was already pressed to the scope because she's looking through the sight.
That was a first reading.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay,
that was a raw reading right there. That was me trying to figure out how I was writing it as I'm reading it out loud.
Okay, I wanted to make sure because otherwise I wanted to change it with you
No,
correctly.
yeah,
But
that would have been the
okay.
proper way to read that would be she closed her eye, pressed to the scope, opened the other,
Okay.
and pivoted to look at the giant creature lurching towards the east. The beast moved
Okay, because
with a-
that's how I just
Right.
wanted to make sure
Right, no,
before
that's just raw reading.
Yeah.
It's unpracticed reading.
Yeah. Okay.
The beast moved with a rolling gait now, swiping at the people fleeing in terror with clawed hands. Cars were batted aside like children's toys with one hand. See, I used hand. Cars were batted away like children's toys, flying through the air and crashing into building fronts. Dozens of bystanders were swept up with the other claw, their mangled bodies shoved into the hungry maw below the mass of writhing tentacles. Hank debated which situation needed her immediate attention, and I might comma there. Her partner, or the hundreds of people being murdered by a marauding monster. Why not both? She'd call in reinforcements, that could drop an airstrike or something, then pop a few rounds into green and save Silver. Again. She thumbed her CP to pull up the comms. The network was dead. The same channel that had been alive with chatter minutes ago was gone, wiped away. Scanning through the channel, she couldn't find a signal for anything. Someone or something had taken down all local communications, but that meant they had to be close. Switching through the various spectrums of her lenses, Hank searched for something out of place, besides the city being destroyed by a giant monster straight out of a Lovecraft story. Oh, and the volcanic activity in the streets below that tore buildings from their foundations. Hank turned her head slowly, scanning the area to find what had taken down the network. A spike in her readouts drew her attention. A burst of magenta splashed the interface and the device zoomed in on a figure. Among the wreckage of a coffee shop below, sitting at a laptop like the world was all in one piece and not falling down around them, sat a woman. One hand held a mug of steaming liquid, the other typed on a graphene keyboard. I might need to pull graphene out there because later I make this antiqued laptop. Hank pulled away from the sight on top of the weapon and blinked. Pressing her eye to Sydney's scope again, she spun the zoom dial with her thumb. Keasia Gray, in all her bored yet commanding presence, sat at a tall table in the center of the cafe. Setting the cup of joe to one side of the machine in front of her, the woman smiled as she typed. The device was an older computer, the kind they used to bring into war zones back at the end of the last century. A tough machine that could take a beating, but also woefully outdated. Pivoting to check on Silver, Hank gasped, and her finger reflexively squeezed Sydney's trigger. You need a moment, or shall I go on?
Let's go ahead and just... There's a couple of little things. Not going to take me very long at all to go over.
Go on.
So,
and by the way, quick, while you're mulling this over, I hate it when I put 3 line breaks. In other words, enter 3 times between one scene and another as I switch perspectives or whatever. I hate it when it's on a page break because then I can't tell it's a break. It drives me nuts. Go on.
Yeah. So back towards the beginning of this reading, when Hank first realized something was wrong with what was going on with Silver, you'd had it. Silver was pale, shaking, and looked terrified. Period. That was an expression that Hank had never seen on the man before. I changed it to a single sentence, which is Silver was pale, shaking, and looked terrified, an expression that Hank had never seen on the man before with an M dash between, to emphasize that she'd never seen that on him before. This was a different reaction for him, that she'd never seen that. And that is it's kind of stylistic. There's nothing wrong with how you had it originally, but when you read through pretty smoothly. And I think it just helps emphasize that abruptness of, she's observing and she's kind of caught up at the fact that she's never seen Silver look like that before.
Right. What else?
And that's a way to use that M dash when you're following with a reaction, and the kind of reaction to what happened before the M dash. That's a bit of it. We won't talk about verbs right now. So when you did talk about the device was an older computer, the kind they used to bring into war zones back at the end of the last century, you stumbled.
Yes.
I changed into at. Because you're talking about a specific point of time at that time instead of in. In would be in a period, like in an era. Okay. And I just wanted to make sure that, to understand why I made that change, because on the surface it doesn't look wrong, but when you get into the particulars, when you're talking about, at a particular time, and it's a rough point of time at the end of the last century, but you're still talking about something specific.
Makes sense. Right. Okay, let's see what we can do in another 15 minutes or so. Okay, switching perceptions again, or perspectives. Silver stumbled backwards, throwing his arms up to protect his face from the attack. The claws flashed again and again, and Silver realized that the thing in front of him wasn't attacking him. It was attacking the $1 million tech suit he wore. The Truod had severed the flight suit's connection, shredded the bulletproof material that had no resistance to being cut. The creature knew the tech, knew what to incapacitate and what to ignore. These were the same type of, and that should be plural, beings that had tried to overrun Silver's home and had nearly succeeded. This is, again, a lot of, there's hints throughout this book to Silver's background, and book 3, Silver and Smith and the Time Raiders, will go more into that. Silver fell to the ground and crab crawled backwards, pieces of his flight suit falling away. His mind raced for a way to handle this fight. He'd faced things like this before, but it had been a long time ago and a world away. Pulling the K-bar from the sheath on one calf and a stun baton from the other, Silver scrambled to his feet. Brandishing the former, he popped the latter to its full length with a flick of his wrist, white lightning arcing up the shaft. I always think of penis when I say shaft, but whatever. Yeah, I know. 15 on the inside sometimes. Silver rocked back and forth across shards of stonework and glass that had fallen from buildings, stabbing the creature repeatedly in the ribs with his knife. The alien didn't seem to notice, standing over him and tearing at him. See, originally when I wrote this scene, I had him prone, and the creature probably shouldn't be standing over him anymore. Why, hello, Trim.
Okay, I just took that as and I know I'm going to butcher the Truod as just being taller.
It might be. It might be. It might work just fine.
Your descriptions of green were tall and gaunt, taller than
Silver.
Silver, and I think even if he's not completely prone on the ground, he's in a defensive posture still. Which means knees bent kind of this way, whereas the attacker is in this
aggressive over.
So I think it still works. Yeah, okay. Like he's standing over, he's aggressive, he's pushing down towards Silver here, who's in that, maybe, like I said, he's not necessarily prone on the ground, but he is in a defensive position. Yeah, so I think it still works. The boxer
stance where he's shoulders on. Yeah. The flight suit was destroyed, and only the underlayer of Kevlar material had prevented the bounty hunter from being eviscerated. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, Silver said through gritted teeth, jamming the electro baton into the belly of the Truod. The creature stumbled backwards from his position atop the supine. See, this is where I've got him prone still. Maybe I did have... No, I did have him prone here. Okay, maybe I had him standing originally and I made him prone. So Silver surged to his feet.
I think you had him up and down.
Yeah, because he crawled backwards.
Yeah.
Silver surged to his feet, knife and baton at the ready, and took 2 steps towards his attacker, straddling the enemy in a reversal of a few moments before. The bounty hunter froze before he could bring his weapon to bear. Laying on his back, Green held a 15-centimeter long tube of dull silver. The tip glowed purple, the same color as the blast that had almost shot Silver down above the city. The creature looked up at the man from its back, a hysterical grin spreading across the alien face. With precise movements, Green waggled his index finger back and forth and tucked it under the trigger guard. See, I need to break this "you've made your choice human" to "you have made your choice human," because he doesn't use contractions. Green hissed, "But neither of us need to live with it." The muscles in the Truod's arm flexed, and Silver knew the shot would come in less than an eye blink. He'd seen so many forearms move in that same way, a moment before the attached hand pulled the trigger and ended some poor sap's life. The creature's grin widened, everything moving in slow motion in Silver's perception, and the hand tightened to balance the kick of the weapon. Green raised the alien firearm the final centimeter for the killing shot, and the Truod's hand exploded. "Good night, Trent. Thank you for stopping in." "Here's to you." Chunks of flesh spattered Silver, who swore and flinched back. With a knee-jerk reaction, the military knife slashed down across the jugular of the enemy. Green pushed against Silver's ankle with his remaining hand, sliding out from under the man. The creature grabbed at its throat, choking, spitting yellowish bile and phlegm. The bounty hunter thrust with the electro rod, pressing it to the enemy's chest. The creature looked up as its body spasmed. It should be spasming at that point if we make those changes that you put in. Arcing in a contortion of pain. No?
Nope.
The creature looked up, its body spasmed, arcing.
Is that supposed to be looked up?
Probably.
Okay, because I took it as like his muscles were locking up and then his body spasmed.
No, it could be locked up. He's already looking up. The creature.
And then the other happened, and then arching in a contortion of pain.
Okay. Thank you for those points, Trey. No, you're good. I'm checking chat also. And
okay.
Coming up, let's see. How far are we close to the end? Let's see if I can... What I'm going to do...
Yeah, we're on page 9 and 12, so keep reading.
Okay. Choking and stumbling backwards. Maybe choking while stumbling backwards. The muscles of his torso and throat locking. Green moved backwards. We got backwards in the same sentence. Need to change that. Choking and stumbling.
Choking, stumbling. The muscles of his torso and throat locking. Green moved backwards.
There we go. That's better.
So, yeah.
Trying to fend off the continued attacks of Silver. The bounty hunter sought lungs and vital organs, plunging his blade into the chest cavity of the attacker again and again. Whatever the anatomy, the stabbing had the desired effect, and Green crumbled to the ground, lying still. Silver pulled up his interface of his card phone, still refusing to think of it as a CP, and keyed in the code to link to Hank. New perspective for anybody not seeing the screen. The moment the creature's arm blew up, Hank turned back to her other pressing duty. Swinging Sydney to pan across the devastated storefronts of the city, she found the coffee shop. Making sure I'm not doing word repetition. Sighting down the scope, Hank watched the woman work like... And I probably should define which woman. No, we got coffee shop. We're good.
No, yeah. We're good, yeah.
Sighting down the scope, Hank watched the woman work like it was any other day in the city. She could almost hear the clack of the keys as the woman tapped and pecked, not packed, Supposed to be pecked.
That's yeah.
Across the ancient interface. The woman looked up, leaning forward to look through. And look should be changed to gaze or peek or something besides look. Through the shattered plate glass windows and up past the shredded awning. The woman smiled at the behemoth lumbering away from her, like she'd seen the sweet scene of a toddler taking its first steps. You think the instead of a there? Is this the one you wanted to talk about?
Yep.
Go ahead, talk about that real quick. Because here, let me read it both ways.
Yeah, okay.
So originally I had, the woman smiled at the behemoth lumbering away from her like she'd seen a sweet scene of a toddler taking its first step. Tara made one small correction, which we're going to discuss. The woman smiled at the behemoth lumbering away from her like she'd seen the sweet scene of a toddler taking its first steps. Go ahead.
So it's not a correction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? This is an editorial suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
A sweet scene of a toddler taking its first step is any sweet scene, whereas the implies something very specific and maybe a little closer to the reader.
Yeah.
A little bit more personal.
That makes sense.
The
makes it
scene.
Specific instead of general. Okay.
Exactly.
Hank wanted to grit her teeth, huff a sigh out, and shake her head. But she couldn't. It would ruin her shot. She traced the trigger with her fingertip, then slid it across the flat surface, feeling the metal pull bar that she'd shaved down for finer manipulation. The cool, smooth surface was a friend that had been there for her since she was in her teens, since she'd been alone and ridiculed in private school for being too smart, plain, and polite. The other girls had hated her for getting good grades easily, for being nice to teachers. Once they'd moved to field maneuvers, she'd been mocked for being clumsy and not very fast. But then they'd started archery, and a few eyebrows went up. Switching over to target practice with a rifle, a lot of the teasing stopped when she clustered center with 6 out of 10, and only 1 out of 10 missing the center mass. By week 3, Hank would create a 5-centimeter hole in the center of the target sheet's head. Skeet shooting with moving targets of clay discs being catapulted through the air, with her hitting almost every single one, had stopped almost all the teasing. Except for Melinda Rickenbacker, who'd caught her in the hall one day after classes and slammed her against the lockers. The girl had made it clear that Henrietta was nothing more than a low-class wannabe, whose father was nothing more than some second-rate archaeologist not worth thinking about except to laugh at. The encounter appeared to end with Hank on the floor, crying and clutching her tablet to her chest. She hadn't even realized she was going to throw the device until Melinda's head snapped forward and the girl went down, her face smashing into the floor. The girl and instructors had already been calling her Hawkeye for her ability to track and hit anything, but the stories after that day changed it to the Hawk. From what the other students said, she had screeched like a bird of prey. Not screamed or yelled, but screeched, a hunting call as she attacked the other girl with claws. Hank didn't remember any of that, just that professors and the janitor, Toby McMillan, had been pulling her from Melinda. The other girl lay in a curled ball, crying and holding her head. Toby had given Hank a wink and called her Hawk, and the name had stuck. Hank wasn't picturing Melinda when she pulled the trigger, but the memory of that same smirk on the girl was on the woman's face in the cafe felt similar enough to call up that memory. The woman's gray-skinned form jerked when the round entered her cranium. Keisha Gray shifted and twisted, her body transformed into something alien that resembled what Hank had seen when studying green through the scope before shooting his hand off. But different. The woman's head, after the change, was larger, but the body was smaller and more lithe. The bullet had missed her real head, instead passing through whatever illusion the woman had in place. One moment. I gotta let Kitty in the office. Come on. There you go, sweetie.
When the kittens call, you gotta answer.
She needs her private time. Warriorland. It's a fucking different branch of the same species, Hank muttered, touching her finger to the trigger and aiming lower for the core. But I bet they die the same. The next round ruptured the chest cavity, taking the creature in a glancing shot to her side, which she spun away, dropping to the floor of the cafe. Chiesa shifted, whatever illusion or skin that had concealed the true form falling away. The smaller gray-skinned body writhed in pain and punched at keys of the computer that had been pulled from the table. The screech of the monstrous alien Goliath echoed off buildings and flailed against the skyscrapers around it. Hank switched tactics, sending out a distress call to anyone who could hear it. I'm sorry, I feel like there should be a comma there after tactics. Punching in the code to send out a missive to call in an airstrike from local authorities or anyone else. You know what? I think this is one of those things where it was one big long sentence and I put the periods in to break it up.
I didn't have a problem with the periods.
Okay.
After, like, Hank switched tactics. And you said maybe that should be a comma. No, she switched tactics, which means she stopped one, started another, and that period's going to help emphasize that to the reader.
Okay. Maybe I
Sending out a distress call to anyone who could hear it. And then she punched in the code.
Maybe
put the comma in here.
Maybe tenses. She sent out a distress call to anyone who can hear it. She punched in a code to send out a missive. Because I've got present tense on these, and there's no follow through on it.
Right, but what I would do is rewrite it. Sending out a distress call to anyone who could hear it, comma. She punched in the code to send out a missive to call it an airstrike.
That's fair, yeah. And we're almost done with this chapter. Well, hello, Kennedy. Give us just a moment. We're almost finished up with this chapter. Good to see you. And by the way, Kennedy is one of the gentlemen that put a story into one or more of your anthologies. Joseph Kennedy.
Yep.
So, it does. I agree, Wordwin. Missive threw me off as I was reading it. I think maybe message is just better there. Or just punching in the code to send out a call for an airstrike instead of missive.
Yeah, to send out a call for an airstrike.
Yeah, I agree, Wordwin.
I liked the missive, but
I don't think it fits with the mood, with the tone, with the flow. I agree, it's a bit... Her screen blinked a failure notification, reiterating that the network was down. There would be no help coming. No one would answer the call to drop munitions or missiles on the attacking creature. Ireland. Fine, Hank growled. Be that way. I didn't need your help anyway. Hank threw herself off the building, slapping her suit's hover rounds to launch herself into the air. And that's the end of that chapter.
So let's see.
Wordwin, I don't think plea works right there because Hank is in no mood to beg. She's pissed. She's done. She's doing what needs to be done. Tara, any closing thoughts on all this? And then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, just kind of running through to see if there was anything I really... I know on that last page, there were a lot of as's. Then I changed to the gerund form of the following verb in order to keep that momentum going rather than the reader having to kind of stop and put it back in. most of it there. I did change one as to when, simply because, so you weren't having that repetition of as. And then when kind of implies a reaction to something as well.
Right.
So when Kaizia spun away, all right, instead of as she spun away, when implies reaction to something vice just happening.
Kiesia.
Kiesia, yeah.
And I only know that because I've had a half dozen Kiesias that I've spoken to at work.
So that's what I just wanted to kind of talk about in that little bit there. Taking out, when you want the action to keep going, to pick up that pace. If you've got too many as in there, it's a pause, and you don't want that. So,
nope. The as is the abbreviated version of as he did, as she did. It's just mid-sentence instead of end of sentence.
Yeah.
And by the way, word to win, demand is a fairly reasonable word to use there, because she is feeling a bit, not, and Kennedy says she's hankering to kick some tail.
I think in this scene, we get to see a little bit of Hank losing her objectivity. In the other scenes, in the other 2 chapters that we've gone over, in the other 2 episodes, we saw instances of Hank being able to take that step back, very calmly assess the situation, and make a very logical choice in what could be an emotional situation. This is not an instance of that. She's trying to.
She's overwhelmed.
She's trying to step back a little bit. She's trying to find the objective view, and she's getting frustrated because she says in those other instances, when she took her plan and she came up with a plan and she took the action, it did exactly what needed to happen. And that's not happening here. And so we're seeing that little bit of anxiety, that little bit of frustration come through here. And that's in some of those word choices there. We're seeing that there. It's the first time we see her actually kind of swear a couple of times.
It's true. Besides when she's arguing to bring out emotion in Silver that he's buckling down on and trying to hide.
But this is, she's swearing to herself here.
Right.
So this is an actual true, not to get a rise out of Silver, but because this is to get a rise out of nobody. She's speaking to herself. It's almost like, and if you look at when she uses that in the past to get a rise out of Silver, an emotional rise, when she does that here, is it to invoke an emotional rise out of herself because she's recognized she might need that in this situation, because that objective stance is not working for her. She takes that objective, she figures out what to do, and it doesn't work.
And that is something the reader can determine for themselves, and different readers will read it different ways. And that's fair.
The reader reading this, they're not going to take that critical, oh, look at this, now she's swearing to herself and it's doing, no, it's just kind of, they're going to get that sense. They're going to understand what's going on, even if it's not something that they can objectively as a reader sit down back.
They will
say,
go,
hey,
oh, she's pissed now. And some might go, one way, but they all understand what's happening.
Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap this up. Tara, as I've said, do you have more before we wrap this up?
Just checking over my notes to make sure, and no, I don't. I hit everything.
Okay,
on
let's
this
wrap
chapter.
this up. Tara, again, I have so much enjoyed this because I get to hear the things that you don't necessarily put into the edits, and it's been delightful. And hold on a second, I'm going to switch over to this other screen here, so for those on the podcast, you'll hear my transition noise. That's it right there. Okay. So for everybody else that joined us, thank you so much for joining us over these past 3 episodes where we edit this. I'm so looking forward to hearing people's feedback and thoughts about the process or the writing or both. So Tara, this was amazing, and we will catch you on the next couple. I believe the next couple we will be working with Aaron Kennedy. So we'll talk about more on the next episode with that. Good night, guys. Let's get some outro stuff here, and we will catch you again next time. Before we go, I want to remind everyone that you can email us at writenightshow@gmail.com. That's right with a W, night with an N, show@gmail.com. To let us know your thoughts on the show's topic, suggest other topics you'd like to hear us discuss, or just have a message read out on air to someone in your life. Thanks to everyone for supporting the show by downloading the podcast, sharing it on social media, grabbing some shirt stickers and mugs from bit.ly/tavern merch, or barware patches and hats from bit.ly/tavern merch too. It's bit.ly/tavern merch or tavern merch followed by the number 2. Thanks to everyone who joined us live at twitch.tv/Travis Tavern Talk, and everyone who supports the tavern by subscribing, hosting, throwing bits, raids, and most of all, commenting.
Thank you for joining author Travis Sivart and the other writers, content creators, and all-around amazing people for our discussion here on Right. Join us again soon, and until you do, make sure you create with passion, enjoy the journey, and remember, every night can be right enough.